The last experiment will blow your mind. These are 10 crazy science experiments that actually work. Number 10. You can't smile and breathe at the same time. Try it. It's almost impossible. This is because there's a hole in the roof of your mouth called the soft palate, which opens when you smile. And so when you try to breathe and smile at the same time, the air rushes through this hole. But if you breathe through your nose, you can actually smile and breathe at the same time. No, a spider spinning a web in space. In 2019, scientists launched an experiment into space that involved spiders. They sent 2 tarantulas and 2 orb-weaving spiders to the International Space Station. Why? Because they wanted to see how these spiders build their webs in zero gravity. What they found out is that the spiders had trouble creating their webs. Normally they sense where their web is going to be located by feeling the wind currents around them. But since there's no wind in space, the spiders were confused and just ended up making random webs wherever they could. One scientist commented that it was interesting to watch the spiders struggle to make webs in space, because they have to rely on instinct alone. Without the ability to feel the wind, they end up building these webs in strange places, like on themselves. No. 8. Stare at this image for about a minute and then look away. When you look away, you'll see an after image of the flower. Now look back at the image. It looks normal, right? But if you look closely, you'll notice that the center of the flower is a little darker than the rest of the petals. Now look away again. The after image will still be there, but it'll also be in other words, the black center of the flower will be white. What's happening here is that the cells in your eyes are becoming less sensitive to light. This is called sensory adaptation. And it is the same thing that happens when you spend a lot of time in a dark room. Your eyes will eventually adjust to the darkness and you'll be able to see better. But if you stay in the dark for too long, your eyes will become less sensitive to light. And when you walk outside, everything will seem really bright and you might even go blind for a second until your eyes adjust. Number 7. The man who stayed awake for 11 days straight. Tony Wright holds the world record for staying awake the longest. He did it in England in 19. That's longer than any other human in recorded history. So why did he do it? Well, it started as a dare, but then he decided to raise money for charity. While he was awake, he read books, watched TV, and talked to people. He didn't sleep a single moment during those 11 days. But eventually he started to experience some serious side effects. He began hallucinating and seeing things that weren't really there. He also became very paranoid and wouldn't let anyone leave his sight. But he kept going until finally his friends and family convinced him to go to bed. The next day he slept for 14 hours straight without waking up once. No. 6. You can't think of a color while listening to this. Try it. Can you imagine a color right now? It's hard, isn't it? Scientists have found that it's extremely difficult to think of a color while hearing the word. This is because our brains associate certain colors with certain sounds. For example, the word red makes us think of the color red, while the word blue makes us think of the color blue. But if we hear the word red and we try to imagine the color green, it just doesn't work. Our brains simply won't let us do it. No. 5. Put your hand in front of your face and close one eye. Then switch the hand to the other side and close that eye. You will notice that the hand on the left side seems to be larger than the one on the right side. This is a trick of the brain. It's called the Ponzo illusion. It's named after the Italian psychologists who discovered it in 1950. Illusion happens because our brains compare the size of objects based on their distance from us. So when the hand is closer to us, it appears smaller, while the hand that is farther away appears larger. No. 4. Secret CIA experiments. During the Cold War, the CIA was desperate to find a way to communicate with people who were in enemy territory. They wanted to be able to send messages to spies without having to use radio or telegraph. This led them to invest millions of dollars into research on telepathy and psychic powers. They recruited people with extrasensory perception (ESP) and trained them to send messages using only their minds. These people were called stargazers because they would stare at each other while trying to send messages. Other times they were hooked up to machines that measured their brainwaves in an attempt to detect psychic activity. However, these experiments were never successful. The CIA eventually gave up on the project in the 1970s, but not before spending millions of taxpayer dollars on something that turned out to be nothing but a bunch of bull. No. 3. Bananas freeze in space. In 1968, NASA conducted an experiment to see how different foods would freeze in space. They took bananas, potatoes, and other foods and froze them on the outside of a spacecraft. But when they checked back on the food, they found that only the bananas had frozen solid, because bananas are mostly water and water expands when it freezes. This expansion of water creates enough pressure to break through the skin of the banana and freeze it solid. But the other foods didn't have enough water in them to do this, and so they just ended up being covered in ice. No. 2. Sensory deprivation tanks. Sensory deprivation tanks are like bathtubs filled with warm water. People lie down in these tanks while they're being deprived of all sensory input, including sight, sound, and touch. This is done in order to relax the body and mind and allow people to enter a state of deep relaxation and tranquility. But what does science say about sensory deprivation tanks? Well, studies have shown that they can have some pretty interesting effects on your brain. For example, in one study, Researchers found that people who spent just 30 minutes in a sensory deprivation tank experienced significant reductions in anxiety and depression. Another study found that people who used sensory deprivation tanks as a form of meditation were able to focus their attention better than those who didn't use the tanks. And no. 1. Emotional contagion. Have you ever been around someone who was so angry that you could feel their anger, or been near someone who was so happy that it made you feel happy too? Well, it turns out that emotions can be contagious, and it doesn't matter whether the emotion is positive or negative. In one study, researchers found that people who were exposed to positive emotional expressions, like smiling faces, reported feeling happier afterwards. Similarly, people who were exposed to negative emotional expressions, like frowning faces, reported feeling sadder afterwards. So if you want to be careful about the emotions you're putting out there, remember that they can have a ripple effect on those around you. Now let's recap the most shocking experiments. First, you can't smile and breathe at the same time. Then we saw how spiders create webs in space. Next, we learned how staring at a flower can create an After that, we saw how the man who stayed awake for 11 days straight experienced hallucinations. Then we looked at how bananas freeze in space. After that, we learned about what happens to your brain when you use a sensory deprivation tank. And finally, we saw how emotions can be contagious. Now it's time for you to make your voice heard. Comment below which experiment was the most shocking to you. And don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe for more content like this.